too many times when we make a presentation of our farm program, we think strictly about one part of it and get tied up in a discussion or argument or whatever you want to call it about one little teeny phase of it and forget about all of the other things that will encompass it. And as a result, we end up, say that we get a fair price set per bushel, then at the other end of the board, the acreage allotment is filed down to such a fine line that if you are to get full parity for what you produce on the acres that you're allowed, you can't make it. And that happens time and time again. You just look at it now, and then if you go over, it's like here recently I've been reading where some of the boys went over 2/5 of an acre, and someone comes along wanting to fine them $415 or $418, that'd make my old hair stand on end, because I never, to the best of my knowledge, ever was calling my acres that close, but maybe you can with that rolling wheel when the man comes along. And another thing that appeals to me is if we would only go all out with, as I put it, a king-size program to do a king-size job in research toward finding new uses and new markets for our agricultural commodities produced on the farm, I don't see where we could lose. This problem isn't any different than any other problem. We've been able to solve other problems, like Sputniks and Mutniks. We were way behind there, and the first thing we know, we've got one in outer space too. And on polio, when it forced us to the wall, when some of us had boys and girls that had it, or some of our loved ones around us that came down with it, and we all started at the grassroots level and built up, and someone came out with a vaccine that's cut down. We can do anything that we make up our minds to, but we have to sit down and work together. So that field hasn't even been scratched. Another thing that I think of, that I think we've been missing a bet on, of course, is on the farm storage. When I think of the amount that we pay out for storage, I only wish that amount that we're paying out for storage were going to our farmers. Sure, I can see a number of complications, but you can on any problem under the sun. You can find complications if you look for them. So why not investigate that? The storage last year ran us almost $1 million a day, and you think of 364 million, some 100,000 being paid out to our farmers the country over, would mean quite a bit. There's some of it going there now, of course, but by and large it isn't. And then, of course, I say that the prices that we are receiving today and have for the past 5 years have been prices under peacetime. And that means a lot to me, and I think it does to you as fathers and mothers and brothers and sisters and sweethearts of servicemen. Well, it's a little different when you stop and think. I used to harp and say I think we can build up in peacetime a program of success. Well, the thing about it, they can talk about brinks of war and all of these other things, but the fact still remains that we haven't been in a shooting war. And we should work night and day to see to it that we continue along those lines. Now, just about time. I'll be back during the pleasure to come before you. Thank you very much.
And I hated to have to write that little note, but them were the rules. And the next speaker will be Representative George McGovern.
Well, Mr. Moderator, and my distinguished fellow candidates, members of the South Dakota Farmers Union. It's always nice to visit the Farmers Union Convention, and it's nice to be introduced by Bob Lusk. We had Congressman Harold Cooley, as our speaker in Madison last night, and he told us a little experience that he said actually happened to him when he was a lawyer practicing law in the state of North Carolina some years ago. A woman appeared at his office one morning and told him that she wanted to file suit for divorce. So he proceeded to ask her for a few questions. He said, "Now, when were you married?" Well, she said, "I was married yesterday morning." Well, this struck Mr. Cooley as being a rather odd situation, and he said, "How do you explain that you want to get a divorce after being married only 24 hours?" Well, she said, "Mr. Cooley, I want to tell you that that man was the most overly introduced man I've ever met in my life." So we appreciate these simple introductions that come right to the point and get us on the stage. I do want to congratulate the officers, the retiring president, my good friend Paul Upsall, and your new president, Harold Golseth, the other officers and members of this organization that I believe are doing more for the family farmers and the family businessmen of South Dakota and rural America than any other organization in the nation. I cannot make the claim, as many of you can, and as my distinguished opponent can, of having been born on a farm. But I was born in a small town, Avon, South Dakota, where my father was serving as a minister, and if my memory of those childhood days is correct, the only people who had any less money in those days than the farmers were Methodist ministers. But in any event, I came in close contact with the problems of agriculture at a very early age. The first time I ever saw an adult with tears in his eyes was when I drove out with my dad to do some pheasant hunting at a nearby farm, and we met one of our old farm friends who was going to go out and do a little hunting with us that afternoon, who had just received his check for the hogs that he had sent into the Sioux City market a few days before. And as it turned out, the check that he received wasn't quite large enough to cover the shipping charges on sending those hogs into market. And I remember, even as a young boy, recognizing the injustice of that kind of an economic and political situation that permitted good rural people working hard, their families working along with them day after day, to live under that kind of a situation. And I want you folks to know that during the short time that I've been privileged to serve you as your representative in the Congress, I have worked harder to prevent that kind of evil developing again in this country than I have worked on any other single problem facing the American people. Now today the situation is reversed from the one that we had a year ago when I was the only Democrat appearing on a panel where there were 3 Republicans. And today Governor Foss is here alone representing his party. I want to say on behalf of the record of my party that I'm very proud of the way we have kept faith with the farmers of the nation during the 20 years that our party was in control of the administration in Washington. We took over a bankrupt agricultural industry in the United States in 1933 and built it into the most powerful and most efficient and most productive agricultural program that existed anywhere in the world. And that's one of the great accomplishments of the political leadership of my party during that crucial period in history. I think it had a lot to do with the winning of World War II and with the establishment of better standards of life, not only for the farm people of this country, but for the business people on Main Street, for the teachers, the ministers, the clerks, and all the rest who depend on farm prosperity for their own welfare. Now, I'm extremely disturbed about the development that has taken place in American agriculture under the administration that took over some 6 years ago. I was alarmed in reading some days ago about a new development known as vertical integration, which is just another word for corporation farming. If that program could be kept in the hands of the farmers, it wouldn't be quite so bad. But what is happening under this new program endorsed by Secretary Benson in official publications of the Department of Agriculture is that the great corporate groups, the feed companies, the packers, the millers, are moving into the field of agricultural production on a broad scale. They are reducing the farmer under this program to the status of a hired hand, or a serf, if you please, whose every decision will be controlled by the corporate groups represented in this new development called vertical integration. It's already taken over the poultry industry on the East Coast. It's moving into the hog industry in the South. It's beginning to develop even here in the Midwest. And under this alarming new development, the farmer is given the feed by the company. He's told the processes that he ought to use. He's told when to market the product. Another contract is made simultaneously with the packer as to the delivery date and the price, and the farmer finds himself on a factory production line much in the same status of hired hands in the city. He has lost the independence that has meant so much to us in our family farm way of life here in South Dakota and across the country. And to me, this constitutes a real threat to the businessman and to the community, because these great corporate groups moving into agriculture do not buy their equipment and their supplies in Huron or Mitchell or Sioux Falls or Woolsey. That equipment is bought in the great industrial centers of the country. The families are moved off the farms and replaced by one group where formerly there were 6 or 8 families, which certainly poses a threat to the schools and the churches and our community life in general. Well, the moderator has just flashed the signal that my time has expired. I hope to be back for some more questions here in a few minutes.
That gives one a feeling of great power to be able to stop a governor and a congressman from talking right in the middle of a speech. Now, I want to explain the fact, George, that the introductions are very simple, because this is supposedly a very impartial panel, and if I were to say I want to introduce a fine governor and a good congressman, that may mean the same to me, but someone's going to interpret that differently, and it wouldn't be impartial. So we just introduce the man. Now, the next one on our program is the candidate, the Democratic candidate from the West River, the mayor of Rockerville, J.T. Terry McCullen.
There are too many people here this afternoon who know me, or this morning, who know me and know something about my life, to attempt to tell you that I have a farm background. I don't have any at all. I was born and raised over here 40 miles east of, or west of Huron at Miller in Han County. My father's family and my mother's family were farmers. They homesteaded here in South Dakota. But I was born and raised in a small town. My father owned farms and operated farms. And it was vividly impressed upon me from the time that I was old enough to know that money could buy candy in a local store, that our prosperity and our ability to buy the things that we wanted to depended upon largely whether or not there was a good crop in Han County. And that same thing is true here today. I don't think that you have to have a working and intimate knowledge of farm operations to know that the state of South Dakota is largely dependent upon the prosperity of the farmer. I'm in business in the Black Hills in South Dakota, in which we like to call the second largest industry in the state, and that's the tourist business. And I don't have to tell you, I'm sure, that we can tell whether there's been a good crop in South Dakota and Minnesota and Iowa and Nebraska. And we can tell what the prices have been. When the people with those car plates from those states drive up, and we know whether they're going to spend any of their money or not. We're dependent upon the prosperity of the farmer to a degree that we're vitally interested in it. The tourist industry in the state of South Dakota is tremendously interested in the prosperity of the farmer. Now, I could quote you a lot of statistics to prove a point or two and to establish in your minds what I believe. But statistics sometimes fail to prove a point. I'm reminded of the statistics that are quoted in relation to the birth rate of the graduates of different colleges throughout the country. Princeton University, a men's school, the graduates of that university have a birth rate of 3.2% per graduate. The graduates of Vassar College, that great women's college in the East, have 3.7. Now, if that proves anything at all, it proves that men have more children than women. And you can get into trouble with these statistics. But our farm problem, in quotes, it seems to me, is the problem of keeping the farmer prosperous and at the same time keeping the rest of us in this agricultural problem area prosperous. If the crop is poor and the prices are down, farmers go out of business, and another empty store building appears in the smaller towns in South Dakota. I can very briefly tell you what I believe in as far as the agricultural program is concerned, and it's in your banner over the stage here. It's equality and justice for American agriculture. And that's all you want, and that's all that I want. And I've watched with great admiration the work of Congressman from East River, George McGovern, and his work down there, trying to solve this problem, trying to work out something that will assure the American farmer a fair share in the consumer dollar. The price that he receives goes down, and at the same time the price for everything that he buys goes up. His share in the consumer market basket has gone down from over 50 to less than 40% in the last 5 years. It doesn't seem to me to take a great student of agriculture to know that the Benson program has been a flop, that the lower prices has not done what he'd hoped it would do, but it's produced a larger and larger surplus with greater cost to the American taxpayer and less returns to the farmer. I'm sure that it's a problem that can be worked out, but it's going to take someone who's interested in preserving the prosperity of the American farmer, and with it the prosperity of all the rest of us in South Dakota. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Terry McCullen. And now we go to the Governor slate, and we will hear from Ralph Herseth. Ralph?
Thank you, Mr. Moderator Lusk. I want to, at the very beginning, say that we are appreciative of the many years of service that your outgoing president has given to you, the members of Farmers Union. And I want to congratulate the newly elected President Harold Goldseth, a former fellow senator of mine in the 1955 session. In my own behalf, this morning I want to say that Mr. McGovern whispered to me a moment ago that it looked like I might be the cleanup hitter here in order. And of course, you know, there is a certain amount of glamour and dramatics to being the cleanup hitter, especially if you are able to deliver. I have a little story on that isn't exactly typical, but it has a little fun in it I want to tell you about. There was a certain minister who had arranged a certain sermon so that he thought it would be very, very dramatic and clever, and he was speaking on this passage where it reads something like this, that the Holy Ghost is going to descend upon you in the form of a dove. And he had arranged especially that at the time that he made that statement, through a little opening in the ceiling, some young fellow was to release a dove down into the audience to give them the real effect of it, the effect of a good cleanup hitter, so to speak. And he made the statement and nothing happened. He made the statement the second time that the Holy Ghost will descend in the form of a dove. And at that time a voice from the hole above said, "Well, a cat got in and ate the Holy Ghost. Shall I throw the cat down?" I'm supposed to speak here for a given number of minutes, and you are supposed to listen, and I certainly hope that you don't get done before I do. I want to give you this little information that I know most of you are aware of. I was born on a farm in northern Brown County in 1909, on the same farm that my family and I now reside upon. And I have a lifetime experience in the livestock business and the dirt farming business. I think it's a good asset to have in anybody's background. And right now I want to say that without any effort on my part or no word in that direction yesterday at the husking contest, that part of my qualifications received a real shot in the arm. Both the Republican candidate for governor and the Republican candidate for Congress in the 1st District gave a real earthy plea to the audience on the basis of the fact that one of them had farmed and the other one had worked on a farm. And that is the thing, my friends, that I've got the most of to offer, that kind of experience. So I am grateful to both of those candidates for speaking a little bit in my behalf at the same time. I am presently a director on the Houghton elevator, which is about 100 bushel capacity and does a good-sized business in the little town of Houghton. My father was a director on that elevator in his day. My older brother was a director on that elevator in his day. And I am running true to tradition in that respect in serving in that capacity since 1943 on the same board. I'm also a director and a vice president of the board of directors on the James Valley Telephone Cooperative Association, a telephone company, an RTA company, serving a large part of Brown County and a part of 2 other counties, entirely a farming district, and some small towns in that area. In the immediate future, I feel that in my opinion at least, so far as the leadership in the state of South Dakota is concerned, we have to look forward to promote the greatest thing that I see close at hand, and that is the full potential of benefits that is to be derived by our people from the development of the Great Missouri River. In the 1957 session of the legislature, there was a bill introduced calling for the establishment of water conservancy districts in the state of South Dakota, and I have deliberated a great deal upon this, and I feel that in order to put South Dakota in a desirable position so far as the National Congress is concerned, letting them know that we are alert to wanting and take the advantage of all the benefits that might be in the future that we cannot probably see today, that it is expedient and it is good legislative action to pass a bill that would be called an enabling bill, putting us in a position of priority to take full benefit of all the things that might eventually become known that we are not able to see today as benefits for our state and for our people. Again, I want to state my position this way, that we are not being greedy in this respect. We are only asking that we remain in a desirable position to get our fair share. and I want to go on record as being in favor of that kind of legislation for our state. Nationally, nationally, it does seem to me that the number one item is what has been in the next session is what has been called by many the number one failure of the 85th session. A piece of farm legislation that will put farmers on a stable basis and guarantee them equal income commensurate with the rest of their economy, the cost of living and the cost of the things that they have to purchase to stay in business. Certainly, business is somewhat good in South Dakota. I will grant that. This particular year, business is good in South Dakota because 2 units of most crops that were planted, especially of the small grain variety, have been grown and harvested where we normally expect to harvest 1. This certainly isn't a good indication so far as surpluses are concerned, which some people talk about. But I want to submit to you that so far as the law of supply and demand is concerned on things of this kind, it just doesn't always work. So long as the consumption and the production remain in a good relative position to each other, I am in favor of the law of supply and demand. But when it doesn't work and creates a situation like we saw in 1932 for the people in agriculture, and it more or less trickles its way on up through the entire economy, then I think there is nothing wrong with men and women in places of responsible position and authority doing something to regulate the movement of those commodities to market in an orderly fashion and not all in one bulk at one time of the year, and also to establish a real parity position of support prices so that these people may prosper and the rest of our economy may prosper. I can't see anything more wrong about doing that than I can see with, for instance, our engineers and our scientists working with the regulation and control of a great river in our area and putting the water that has been wasted in prior years to good practical use for our people. I see my time is practically up, and I shall omit one subject that I expected to discuss with you, and I thank you very much for having the opportunity to appear before you at this time. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ralph Herseth. And now, for the next few minutes, we will open this panel up for questions and we trust answers. And we will call for the raising of hands. And when you have raised your hand and been recognized, will you first of all state your name and your town. Then we will know a little better who you are and where you're from. Now, has anyone a question?
I'd like to ask Congressman McGovern, do you have the intention of dropping your lawsuit against Glenn March?
No, we certainly do not have any intention of dropping this suit. We did not go into this thing as any kind of a grandstand move or anything of the kind. Here was a clear-cut case of a person putting in print a libelous statement charging a member of Congress with sponsoring a notorious Communist Front organization. That charge is completely false. I know nothing about the organization that Mr. Glenn March accused me of having sponsored. There was never at any time in my life when I authorized or knew about the use of my name by any subversive organization whatsoever. And when Mr. March saw fit to make this false charge in a newsletter that he has been flooding into South Dakota, apparently free of charge to the people who are receiving it, although the newsletter clearly states that it sells for $5 a year, I had no other recourse than to take this matter into the courts. Now, there was a statement which appeared in the press a few days ago that may have prompted this question, in which it was reported that an agreement had been worked out between my attorneys and Mr. March's attorneys whereby the giving of any further depositions in this case would be postponed until after the election. I want to make it perfectly clear to the press and to you people who are here in Huron this morning that this in no way postpones the trial itself. It won't delay it a single day. There are probably not very many lawyers here today, but those who are familiar with the law know that these preliminary depositions can be taken at any time prior to the actual trial. The court action itself must await its turn on the district court calendar. And we have been advised both by Mr. Martz's attorneys and by my attorneys that there is no possibility of this case being scheduled on the district court calendar for at least a year and possibly a year and a half. Now that is not a postponement on my part. I'm very sincere and very determined that this kind of slanderous conduct is not going to be tolerated by myself in any future campaigns. It seems very odd to me that several thousand, possibly up to 30,000 of these newsletters are coming in here to South Dakota, and nobody seems to know where the sponsorship lies. I have some very strong suspicions about it, and I hope that in the course of this legal action we can put the responsibility for this conduct where it belongs.
Thank you, George. Next question. Question over there.
My name is Norman Olson. I'm from Canton, South Dakota. In a recent speech that Vice President Nixon made, he recommended that the next Congress should reduce income taxes in the higher brackets, replace this lost revenue with 1.5% national sales tax. I would like to hear the position of the Congressman on this statement of Vice President Nixon.
You mean both congressmen? Both candidates?
All three candidates.
All three. I wonder if you gentlemen, we will go from left to right again, and will you try to state your position on that matter very briefly, please? Joe Foss.
Thank you, Robert. Well, that's an easy question for me to answer. In the first place, I think we have enough taxes now. In the second place, to me, the income tax should be reserved for the federal government. They do a pretty fair job of getting at most everyone on that. So that's a federal worry. On the national sales tax, I couldn't go along with that. The bulk of our revenue here in the state of South Dakota for the operation of state government comes from sales tax, and that's all inclusive. You can argue the pros and cons, and they do in the various sessions of the legislature, that the majority of the legislators saw fit to enact that some time back. And then, of course, you have your local taxes here, the amount being determined by your school board, your county commission, your town board, and your township board by the budget that they draw up. And when you pay your property tax and your personal tax, your real and personal property tax locally within the county, all of that money goes and remains right in the county. Not one single penny goes out to state government. Now, I like it that way. I think the majority of our citizens like it that way. Now, if folks at a national level come out with this, I don't care who they are or what they are. I've always seen fit to disagree with folks on a point and not let that throw me in any tizzy with them. But as I tell people in politics, if you stick strictly to the subject and leave personalities out of it, you'll have a great day. So as far as that proposal of Vice President Nixon's is concerned, I'd have to disagree with him on it. Thank you.
George McGovern.
Strongly disagree with the proposal of Vice President Nixon that in effect would be to give a little more gravy to those who least need help and to take it out of the hides of the families and the consumers in this country who are already having great difficulty fighting the battle of inflation. I think this matter of taxation is a fundamental part of our government, and that this proposal on the part of Vice President Nixon alone is enough to disqualify him as a candidate for the presidency of the United States. In making that statement in a speech at Harvard University, the Vice President said that he was doing it because he had observed that the taxes were so high on the corporations and the high income groups that they had almost reached the point of confiscation. Well, it's an interesting thing to me to hear statements of that kind made when you read the profit reports of these great corporations. Just 2 years ago, we were informed that for the first time in the history of America, a single corporation in this country made over $1 billion clear profit after they had paid their taxes. Now, I think most of those industrial corporations are in sufficient shape so that they can continue to pay their fair share of the national tax load. As a matter of fact, our best economists tell us that there are about $10 billion in tax loopholes that ought to be closed in the case of some of these great corporate groups, and if that were done, it would probably relieve the average family here in the United States of what is fast becoming an oppressive tax responsibility. The worst possible type of tax for the average family is the sales tax, and certainly we don't want to extend that to the national level.
Terry McCullen.
I'm completely opposed to it as a matter of principle. Taxes ought to be levied on the basis of the ability to pay, and a sales tax doesn't take that into consideration at all. The sales tax is a tax on the necessities of life. It's what you have to spend. And it seems to me to be ridiculous for the Vice President to make such a proposition that we would place a cent-and-a-half national sales tax on all products, and at the same time lower the income taxes on large corporations. The only justification that I could see for his making this suggestion is that the campaign contributions might be coming in a little slowly in that area. It's like to come into.
Questions now. I have a question from the
I want to address my question to the governor. Governor, I've never heard you say, or make a statement to the effect, as you know, the national administration wants the rural electrics to go to the money market for their money, not non-federal loans. Now, I want to ask you, are you in favor of that, or do you oppose it?
No, I'm for leaving it just as it is on the 2% basis. I wrote that, and it will be in the next issue as a highliner. One of them they wrote to me, so they got me down black and white.
Well, you answered my second question. Are you in favor of 2%?
Okay.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you.
question. Oh, there's a man.
Farmers Union based in South Dakota, and I would like to address this question
you get the question?
The question, as I understand it, is, are you in favor of the open market? And what was the...
and let supply and demand set the prices of farm products.
And let supply and demand set the prices of farm products.
And if not, what do you think should control prices?
And if not, what do you think should control prices?
That's a good one. And, well, now, first of all, when we think of farm programs, the various approaches that we make on it and have made in the past, I don't think have been too good. Our various farm organizations get in a good scrap and make their presentation before the House and the Senate agricultural committees and give any of these individuals that are looking for an excuse a chance to step out the side door. So if we were going to have a successful farm program, I don't know how you'd go about it, but I think we could do a better job just among our top farm organizations in getting together prior to the time that they were to make their presentation in Washington. Now, the idea of a fixed price, as far as I'm concerned, is if we make the presentation that you're going to guarantee a profit, and you make this presentation to the rest of Congress or the rest of the country, you are in trouble. Because we are a minority group making up about 13% of the population. And if you come in with any proposal and in your sales talk on it, lead them to believe that it's going to mean a profit, you're out of luck before you get started. So when I talk to labor and the rest of the big groups that outnumber us, my idea is to compare your parity price to minimum wages. Your minimum wage law, $1.25 an hour, say $2 and some cents on your wheat, whatever you have on it, whatever you're working for on it, you compare that. That is not a price that would guarantee you a profit. The price that you're talking about there would be one that would be a place to start from. Now, just as to how that's going to be accomplished, whether you want to have a bushelage requirement on it, and then let all of the rest of it be on a free market. There are those that argue that and think that it might work out. The opponents of it say, oh, it's too complicated. But there isn't a program under the sun that isn't complicated when it comes right down to it. But what I say, where we get gimmicked out of the act right now, is when we talk about a high parity price, 100% of parity, and require actually today, I think, 105% of parity to come out right. When we talk about that, and then taper this thing off on the end with an allowance of 16 acres or 15 acres, if you get a bumper crop on it, so what? You got nothing. You couldn't come out on it if you're getting 105% of parity or 125% of parity. That's why I maintain that in order to solve the farm problem, you're not going to just do it in the halls of Congress with gimmicks. You're going to have to figure out some new uses and new markets for the products right off the farm. The way that we're going at it is of a temporary stopgap measure, and that's where my statement comes out, that we talk about it every 2 years. We really get stirred up about this thing every 2 years. On election years especially. And then as soon as election's over, it seems to peter down. Just here, the last farm bill, they waited right until the end of Congress to reenact the thing. And the farmer didn't know where he stood until just toward the end of Congress. So it's going to take some outside help.
Thank you, Governor Foss. Now I wonder if we couldn't have a question. We don't want to make Brother Herseth feel that he's not in here with us. He hasn't had a question yet. Is there a question for...
Mr. Chairman?
My question was really for Saunders, but I see he's here in tent. Maybe Herseth can take care of it. I was a little inspired by the governor here on that reply. I was very proud of you, Governor, one time when we had a hearing with Brookings before the Senate Agriculture Committee. You made this statement and it rang a bell. You said the flexible price support system has proven a failure. We've got to have 90% support until we get something better. You have it.
No.
Now, this other question to Saunders. Back in the old days, 20 years ago...
This is to Herseth. Emo.
Yeah. 20 years ago, Senator Foss made a speech in the Senate floor in fear. He said politics has become the highly developed art of governing people by deceiving them. And I don't think that's really going to be true so much in the future. I want to commend every one of these boys on the panel here for coming out here and discussing the issue. That's the only way. And I'm thinking back agriculture. Mr. Saunders, on TV the other day, has a program for farmers. Number one, he said we've got to have a farm commission to appoint farmers on it. Sounds good. Number two, farm clinic to consider this sick body of agriculture. And I think there's 4 points to it. And I'm thinking back now to years ago. We had a farm marketing division in Pierre that did a wonderful job in helping farmers develop their marketing cooperatives. And somehow farmers fell asleep at the switch and they recodified the laws and that was dropped and we lost it. 12 or 14 years ago, I don't know, Herseth, if you were in the legislature or not, we passed another law setting up, creating a co-op division of marketing in the Department of Agriculture. Now we've had about 4 administrations since that and nothing has been done. It's a dead letter on the books. And to recommend more commissions and do nothing about it, to me, is quite meaningless. I'd like to see some sincerity. When we pass a law that we actually put it into effect and do something. Now, Mr. Saunders isn't here. Maybe Mr. Herseth would like to comment on that.
Do you understand the question, Mr. Herseth?
Yes, sir. Mr. Lorix, I think the line is very definitely defined between my opponent and I on the question of establishing more commissions. I believe that the law that you referred to dates back to the M.Q. Sharp administration and was placed upon the books for the purpose of providing this kind of representation for farmers. It has not been activated or made any use of, to my knowledge. I was not in the legislature at that time, but so far as additional commissions are concerned, in my opinion, I want agriculture to get all of the representation that we possibly can give it. I want it to have all the benefits of new technical developments and scientific knowledge that can possibly be provided. I don't think that a new commission of agriculture is the answer. I feel that our state college, properly correlated with our Department of Agriculture at the present time, could accomplish as much as any commission could do. And I am against setting up these commissions that will make the state government family larger and more costly. Another thing that I want to comment on regarding this is the fact that only yesterday the candidate who is not here, and I should not be criticizing him in his absence, but to quote his statement, taking people off from these farms or from this segment of agriculture, livestock and dirt farming, and placing him on these commissions to study the problems and facilitate the needs of agriculture. Certainly, if there were nothing there in the first place to facilitate these needs, I could agree with that. But I want to mention the fact right here that I have said in many occasions that under the present administration we do not have agriculture represented on 2 of our very important commissions. In my opinion, the Highway Commission is not represented strictly by agriculture, and a 7-member commission of the Board of Regents is not represented strictly by a member from agriculture. So the argument that was made in favor of this just doesn't add up in my opinion. Thank you.
Here's one thing I'd like to make a correction on. I just wanted to say there on that, Ralph, on that Board of Regents, at the time I appointed Byron Helgerson as a member of the Board of Regents, he was strictly farming. There was no argument about it. And later, after he'd been on there for a year, well, then he went into the furniture business part-time, but still resides on the farm. So, in all purpose and intent, I or anybody else couldn't look down the trail. But I wanted a good farmer on there, and when I appointed him on there, he was strictly a farmer.
May I comment on that?
Yes?
I wanted to be on good footing when I made this statement, and I don't refute the statement that the governor has made at this time. But I was aware of the fact that Mr. Helgerson was the individual who was supposed to represent agriculture on this 7-man commission. Now, if our heart and soul is really dedicated to agriculture, it seems to me that we could have 2 people at least on a 7-man commission who controls the destiny of the biggest educational institution in the state, our South Dakota State College. I did, however, go into the Wright Furniture Store in North Sioux City just 1 week ago and make inquiry as to the status of the man who is supposed to answer this qualification on the Board of Regents. And he is, at the present time, a combination farmer and furniture salesman, and I won't tell you which is his first love.
The same is true of Ralph here and the implements in the farm. Oh, I don't know now. Don't get nervous on that, Ralph.
I think we've rather covered that question now. And I have over here the man in the gray suit.
My name is George McGovern, McIntosh, South Dakota. My question is to Mr. Herseth, candidate for governor. Are you for lowering the board tax to the homestake mine, which Mr. Hoff, the lieutenant governor, has strongly endorsed the recommendation for the cut which was given to the homestake mine? Are you for it or against?
Just a moment, Mr. Seiler. Shall I interpret your question as meaning, was I for the cut that they received in the 57th session of the legislature, or would I be in favor of further?
If you were elected, do you feel that it is a just tax to have the homestake mine taxes reduced and the taxpayers of South Dakota their taxes increased?
I feel that had I been in the 1957 session, I would have voted against lowering the ore tax. I want to qualify my position somewhat to the extent that I think there are 2 sides to that situation worthy of study. I don't want to tax big business out of business or little business out of business. I have heard the plea of the representative of the homestake mine since the 57 session on the basis of taxing them on the more or less income or output capacity. It is worthy of consideration. It goes along the line of the income tax which has been defined by scientists or people who have, not scientists, but economists who have studied taxes, of taxing from the source that is most able to pay. And I think that if it came up for a vote at a later date, I would certainly study both sides of it, because we do want to keep industry such as the homestake mining industry in business. But to answer your question directly, had I been called upon to vote in the 57 session, I would have voted against lowering the ore tax at that time.
Thank you very much, Mr. Herseth. I would like to take a few seconds to ask a non-political question. I notice that they are working with these microphones. I'd like to ask those who can't hear the raise their hands. This is a non-political question. Apparently they can hear all right.
My name is Charles Rose. I'm from Miller. I'm representing Pleasant Valley Local Member 11-7. I'll give all my respect to the candidates in this state by not making a speech. My question falls under the state affairs. So since we don't have both candidates here, the question will probably have to be answered by you, Ralph. Yesterday, this Farmers Union convention passed a resolution saying that we favor a repeal of our after-work law. And I must apologize because the nature of this question is a yes or no answer. As you understand, there's no in between. Of course, you're familiar with those tactics because in the legislature, the legislators have to vote yes or no. And then after they vote, they can say anything they want. Would you please answer that question?
Would I favor a repeal of the right-to-work laws?
Yes.
I sat in the, I'll elaborate just a little. I sat in the legislature when laws pertaining to the right-to-work laws were voted upon. And I will admit frankly and candidly to you people that I have not been close to the organization of labor as a farmer in northern Brown County. The closest contact that I have had to it would be during the 2 sessions of the legislature in which I served. As labor exists in South Dakota today, it isn't highly organized. We are not highly industrial. It appears to me, and I would have to take a definite stand of saying that I would be in favor of repealing those laws. A lot of people in business that is not real big business in this state are opposed to me on that basis. I'll have to take the consequences politically and answer your question yes.
Thank you, Ralph. And I understand there's about 60-some members of this organization that are opposing you on that basis.
Next question, please. Gentleman over there.
Frank Starr, farmer from down there, Sioux Falls, Leon County. All you gentlemen seem to be in favor of us farmers in legislation today. I'd like to ask Joe just what he meant when you said the farm issue is a phony issue there in Chicago at that campaign facility meeting.
Yes, the exact wording that I said is that the politicals make a phony issue out of it. There is a problem there, I can tell you firsthand as a farmer, that the problem is there, but every 2 years, members of one party seem to be as bad as the other, getting up and saying, we're going to do this, we're going to do that, and throw out a lot of chaff and tractor dust, and what happens? Go back to the argument, and I don't know how many of you have had the opportunity to sit on the floor of the House or the floor of the Senate and listen to those arguments. But if you read the congressional record, you'll see that some of them just poke fun at the entire presentation, like talking about a vacation trip of some kind. So the statement that I made, and it's been publicized here by a number of folks that weren't for me in the first place, so regardless of what I would have said, wouldn't have made too much difference. They made it out that I said that the agricultural problem, that there wasn't any agricultural problem. And all you have to do is look at what I have done, what I have stood for, and you can see that I haven't said that agriculture doesn't account to a thing. I just leave that decision with the people. And I was elected a second time after having been carrying out what I considered a positive program. Last year or the year before, whenever we had a drought here. I've set up a program to get hay out to the farmers so that, and ranchers, so that they could keep their foundation herds intact. And some said, well, now that's strictly a political move. It will never amount to a hoot and all this and that. The fact remains that we kept a lot of boys in the ball game that would be sitting on the sidelines right today when the cattle prices are good, had we not taken our own action right here locally and gotten the program underway.